Hello, welcome to this tutorial looking at section 4.2, support for the Vietnam War. As you can see here, we've got a couple of posters we'll come on to later on about what they're about. You can see there's a protest here, let's demand victory in Vietnam. So let's find out why some people were in opposition to those who we looked at last lesson, opposing the Vietnam War. Well, one of the big reasons was this fear of communism. The thing you have to remember is that the Americans were in the midst of a Cold War, fought against the communist Soviet Union and communist China. And they believed that the Vietnam War was part of this. To put it into context, during the late 1940s, early 1950s, there'd been something called the Red Scare. And this was when they believed that communists were trying to take over the world. There was a lot of focus on finding any communists in the United States. Some people lost their jobs, some even went to prison due to this. In the end, the scare had disappeared by the mid-1950s, but the fear of communism hadn't. So many Americans saw the Vietnam War as part of a wider conflict against communism. A really good example is that it was part of Eisenhower's domino theory, that if Vietnam fell to the communists, then other countries would too. And this made Americans think they needed to stop communism and support the war in Vietnam. A more understandable focus was patriotism. Patriotism means a love or loyalty to one's country. And as today, many Americans were fiercely patriotic. They were taught at home and in their schools to be loyal to the nation. Children would pledge allegiance to the flag every morning. This meant that many Americans saw it as their duty to fight. Remember, America had been through World War II, and there were lots of films where actors like John Wayne would fight enemies of America. So people saw it as their patriotic duty to do so. Not taking part would be seen as disloyal, unpatriotic, and a betrayal of American values. It also explains why the war continued. Many Americans didn't want their country to lose face by seeming to have been beaten by a poor nation like North Vietnam. So, whereas lots of people began to see the war as unwinnable, a number of people continued to believe that the war had to be fought to be won, and if not at least won, then certainly not to be lost. A good example of this was the hard hat riot of 1970. Hard hats were named given to construction workers. And we can see a picture here of men wearing the hard hats that you would wear on construction sites. Well, after the Kent State shootings, there were protests all over the United States against the war and against the shootings in Kent State. But on the 8th of May 1970, in New York, construction workers downed tools and charged at a protest, beating up the protesters. The police who were there supervising the event did little to stop them. The protesters, the hard hats, then went to City Hall, angry that the American flag was being flown at half-mast in an act of remembrance. They might argue that the flags weren't flying at half-mast for dead soldiers. And on the 20th of May, there was a pro-war rally led by the Riot leader. So it shows you that lots of people were in support of the Vietnam War. The hard hats represent a working class group that was certainly seen as the wanting to be seen as patriotic to America. Evidence of public support can be also seen by Nixon's silent majority speech. This is where on the 3rd of November 1969, Nixon made a speech saying that there was silent majority in America for his policies towards Vietnam, and he asked for their support. It worked. Now, to say that you've got a large number of people backing you because they're so quiet sounds really strange. It sounds like it shouldn't work, but it did. At a poll carried out a few days after his speech, over 3/4 of Americans polled in the survey actually backed Nixon. He received 50,000 telegrams and over 30,000 letters. These were sent to the White House and they were backing Nixon. Now, 50,000 letters and 30,000 telegrams are not a majority of the American people, but they show a degree of support. Later polls show that most Americans saw themselves as being part of Nixon's silent majority, the people who wanted America to do well and for the war to be sorted out, if not won, at least out with honor. Nixon used this policy of a silent majority speech, or this action, should I say, to get approval from Congress. He was using the public support to get his support politically, and that we will come on to later on. But Nixon was also using this to show that the North Vietnamese, he had support at home, and that would pressure the North Vietnamese at the peace talks that America could continue the war. Now, our final issue is to look at wider political support. Some politicians opposed the war, but many didn't want their country to lose face. Because after all, if you want to be a politician, having your country be seen as having lost a war isn't going to help your re-election potential. However, for the most part, political support for the war was high at first. Johnson's Gulf of Tonkin resolution, the agreement that Congress gave him to allow him to send troops into Vietnam and launch airstrikes, was passed unanimously in the House of Representatives, and only 2 senators objected to it in the Senate, and that's out of 100. So he had a 98% success rating in the Senate and a 100% success rating in the House of Representatives. However, as time passed, that support drained, with events like the Tet Offensive, which made some politicians question if the war could be won. But, like it says here, this was linked to public opinion. So like Nixon's silent majority, the public opinion could improve or get worse, and it would affect political support. That said, even with the Tet Offensive and the negative public opinion that was increasing, Congress could still be pro-war, and they took particularly hard line with the anti-war protesters becoming more violent. Now, in the end, political support for Vietnam was maintained throughout America's involvement, but while they still financed America's involvement, they put down restrictions as to how it could be spent. So, in summary, what we're seeing here, therefore, is that there was a group of American public who would be supporting the war through a mixture of fear of communism, of patriotism, a sense of, and the politicians who feed off that to decide upon their political support. And whilst there was some there, that political support would be maintained. Well, this has been a short vodcast. I hope it's been useful. Any issues, please feel free to comment, and thank you for listening.